You're in for an absolute treat because I'm sat with Andrew Clothier from Regent's Court Financial, who's saved me an absolute fortune with mortgages. I think you've just saved me £3,500 a month on just one of my properties.
Yes.
Which I really appreciate. Andrew, you're a broker, so you are very in tune with best interest rates, best lenders.
Yes.
What's going to happen with interest rates potentially. You're in property yourself, so I've got a list of questions, and I think this will be really helpful to my viewers. So firstly, thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
So what's the name of your company? What is it that you do exactly?
We are Regent's Court Financial, and we're in Wolverhampton, which is where we're sitting, and we are whole of market mortgage brokers.
So now then, in today's market, what would you say is the best thing to do if you've done a property up, sell it or refinance it?
Well, it depends entirely what your plan is, really. You could put it in your portfolio and rent it out. So a lot of people do that. But it does mean that if you buy it in its sad condition, you have to buy it normally as a limited company, because most people want to build their portfolios now in limited company names rather than personal names.
Question. A lot of people are facing problems with stress tests when they're trying to refinance. So they'll buy a property, especially right now we're in Wolverhampton, which isn't particularly expensive, but where I'm from, in Buckinghamshire, average house might be, in my street, well, millions. But if you buy a property, you do it up, and your plan is to refinance it for tax reasons instead of selling it, and because you want to keep the asset.
Yes.
But the rent doesn't quite cut it. What do we do? What are the solutions?
Well, we've had some recently where a good example is that the one man has been renting it out for some time, the property, for £1,100 a month. And the lender's valuer assessed the rent at 600 and something. Well, you can't rent a house in that street of that type for 600 and something. They're all 1,100. And this property has been rented out for some time at 1,100. So we appealed against it. And of course, the appeal was not upheld. So we said to the lender, look, you can't, if you find us a property in this street like this, that you can rent for 600 and something. And they said, well, I can't do that. So yes, they're very common problems. We had one of the Academy members speak to me last week, and she'd gone for a mortgage somewhere on an HMO that she'd made. And the problem was that the lender's value had gone out and put a nil value on the property. Nil. And the justification for that was that the valuer could not find any comparable sales recently in the area.
So they just said they wouldn't lend?
They wouldn't have anything to do with it. So there's a lot of issues.
What was the solution in that case?
Well, the solution, unfortunately, is for her to go to another lender and make sure that that lender doesn't use the same firm of valuers. Because quite often somebody will just go to another lender and find that the same valuer turns up on the doorstep because that new lender uses the same firm of valuers. It's a waste of money.
What is explain to someone that doesn't know, what does it mean, the stress test? What is that? Right. And what's the ratio of rent?
When you want a mortgage on a buy-to-let property, most lenders want to see that you've got some sort of personal income coming in to fall back on if the buy-to-let project goes a bit wobbly. But they don't normally say that your ability to borrow money on a buy-to-let property is based on how much you earn from your work activities. Most of the time they say, no, the amount of money we'll lend you to buy this property or refinance it is based on how much their valuer will assess the rent at. So in other words, if their valuer assesses the rent at £500 a month, they're not going to lend you £1 million. So what they do is they have a stress test. In other words, they work out, assuming a given rate of interest, how much the minimum rental assessment should be on that property. And that's how they'll work with that amount.
And how do they normally work out that stress test?
Well, a standard stress test in this country used to be assuming a rate of interest of 5.5%. This is before rates of interest went up. And then they gross that up by another 40% or 25% if it's a limited company. So that was the old-fashioned stress test. And so, of course, they proved the stress test at 5.5% proved to be correct, didn't it, when interest rates went where they were. Now a typical stress test, if it's not limited company, is assuming a rate of interest of 7.1% for the mortgage interest payment, and then gross that up by 40%, another 40%, if the property is in personal names. If it's in a limited company, instead of grossing it up by 40%, it's more like 25% on top of that 7.1%. Now, if the stress test fails, that could mean if you're buying it, well, should you be buying it? That's the first thing. And if you decide, yes, I should be buying it, I still want to proceed because I think there are other reasons why it's worth the money, or because I'm refinancing the property. There are traditionally two ways round dealing with a stress test that fails. The first way is a lot of lenders, if you have a 5-year fixed rate, will soften that stress test. So in other words, if they'll only give you 100,000, if you want a 2-year fixed, they might give you 110 or 120,000 if you have a 5-year fixed. That's the first way around it. The second way is a way that's not often discussed, which is a system called top slicing. So supposing as a result of the value stripped to the property, it's decided that the rental assessment is, say, £300 a month short, even if you have a 5-year fixed rate. If your personal income from your other activities appears to show that on your family monthly budget, you've got some spare. In other words, you're not spending all your income on living and all your family expenses. There's spare cash coming in. If there's, say, £300, which is the shortfall on the rental, a lender might carry that £300 excess over from your earned income into the stress test.
Right.
And apply it that way. So that's one way. Now, in the last 2 weeks, one buy-to-let lender has come out with a wonderful solution to this shortfall on the stress test, which demonstrates the point that lenders do want to lend. Even though the market is still picking up again, they do need to lend because they need to be able to pay their wages.
Which lender is that, Andrew?
This lender is Virgin.
Okay. Why do you think lenders are keen to do 5-year long terms?
They know that it's going to be quiet for 5 years. The case is going to be quiet. And they know that the person who's borrowing the money is safe because they go in knowing it's going to be so much a month. And they know that for 5 years, that's what they're going to have to pay.
Yeah.
So that's why I think...
Do you think there's an element that they also suspect that base rate might drop? And
yes, they all think the base rate's going to drop.
So if they have a long-term fixed, then it means that you've got to keep paying that high interest rate for 5 years.
I mean, if you look at the situation, when we spoke last November, I think, it's the same as it was then. 2-year fixed rates are generally higher than 5-year fixed rates.
Yeah.
And that's a reversal of how it's always been in the past.
Because now they know that rates will drop, whereas previously they knew that rates would rise.
Right. Now, the Virgin money, the one that's so interesting is this. You can get a 5-year fixed rate with them. They'll soften the stress test because it's a 5-year fixed rate. But normally, if you have a 5-year fixed rate, you will be tied to remaining with that lender for those 5 years. If you move the mortgage away or if you sell the property within the 5 years, you pay a fairly hefty penalty to the mortgage lender. Now, this Virgin scheme says no, 5-year fixed rate, but penalties only for the first 2 years.
That's great.
So after 2 years, if your life changes or if your plans change, you can move away from the rate without paying a penalty, even though you've got 3 years remaining on it.
What about if you want to get a mortgage, but your plan is to rent it out as a holiday let, or maybe not a holiday let, but maybe you just want to put guests in there?
Yes.
Serviced accommodation.
There's more and more lenders doing those now.
That's good.
There's more and more lenders, and there's a fine line between what is a holiday let and what is serviced accommodation sometimes.
Very, very fine.
So, I mean, for example, if there's flats above here, our office here, could they be rented as holiday lets? I don't know. Would anybody say, I want to have a holiday in Wolverhampton?
You'd be surprised, Andrew.
Okay. Holiday lets, serviced accommodation, it's much the same type of thing. It's a short-term let. There's more and more lenders coming into the market now. Lenders were very, very cautious about this.
I remember this. Yeah.
No, there's more coming in. And the lenders generally have two ways of approaching the underwriting, the stress test. So the way that you might like them to do it is to work on the seasoned income from the property, if there is a season, if it's a holiday let, or we've got people doing them near the hospital here in Wolverhampton because you get seasonal workers.
And you get contractors and relocators.
That's right. Ideally, you would find a lender who would assess the holiday let or the serviced accommodation based on the targeted actual annual income in total from that, which would be maybe seasonal. So they look at low, medium and high seasons and take an average maybe over 39 weeks. Now, not all lenders do that for serviced accommodation and holiday lets. Quite a lot of lenders, when they assess the stress test, they say, no, holiday let, serviced. Yeah, the person buying it has very good intentions to use it for that purpose. But it might not work out for them.
Yeah.
They might not have enough people in there to fill it as often as they need to. So let's find out what the single tenancy rental would be.
Sure.
So if the single tenancy rental is $2,000 a month to one family or one person, and the targeted holiday let income is $4,000, they might well do their stress test on the $2,000.
Which is fine.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't work for everybody. You see.
No, but I would suggest if you're buying a property with the intention of doing it as a service department or a service or even a holiday let, your exit strategy should always be AST.
Yes.
Anyway, and if it doesn't stack up at AST, then you probably shouldn't buy it.
Well, a lot of lenders assess these on the AST.
Yeah.
So that does mean that some people struggle to get the mortgage that they want.
Talk to me about commercial lending and also commercial valuations.
Yes, it's a bit of a hot potato still. So we had one actually in Wolverhampton, which was a good example. It was a very large Victorian semi-detached house that had been converted years ago into an HMO with 7 HMO rooms. And the people who owned it outright. So there was no mortgage on it. And they wanted to refinance it for more projects. The first lender they went to sent a valuer around who, when the man opened the front door to the valuer, the woman said to him, "This is an HMO, isn't it?" He said, "Yes." And she said, "I hate HMOs." And every room he took her into, she said the same thing. "I hate HMOs." And you can imagine that when the valuation came in to the lender, it was a negative one. Now, people talk about bricks and mortar valuations. So that particular house, I did an online valuation of it as if it was an ordinary house, and it came out at 380,000. So I guess that's possibly what the valuer did. She probably ignored the HMO element of the property and just valued it at 380 or something like that. We then went to another lender and had what's called a commercial valuation done, which is an appraisal, where it was valued properly and professionally as an HMO. Now, the HMO valuation came out at 450,000, which was based on the rental income. And so that happens all the time. So it's very important when somebody's arranging a mortgage on an HMO to talk clearly to whoever is arranging their mortgage about how the property exists and what they're expecting.
Yeah.
In this particular case, the basic valuation that went wrong cost £550. The fully professional commercial valuation, which worked for them, cost £1,400.
Right.
And it's pages and pages of highly sophisticated analysis. Both the valuers who went out were chartered surveyors, which they have to be.
Yeah.
And both of them were briefed in advance as to what they were looking at. Like when he opened the door and the woman said, "I hate HMOs."
Yeah.
She should never have turned up. They should never have sent her if she doesn't.
I guess it just depends on the lender's criteria, though, doesn't it? What does that particular lender deem as a commercial HMO?
Well, yes. If you ask some lenders about HMO mortgages, we say, when your valuer goes out to this HMO, how are they going to assess it?
Yeah.
And the response from the lender is, it's up to the valuer. It's in their hands. They're the valuers. So there's a lot of contention about commercial valuations on HMO.
So how do you find a valuer that you know will take into account the commercial aspect, assuming it's a large...
Right, well, we can't find a valuer as such, because if you're getting a mortgage, a lender instructs their own valuer. And they usually, they don't have their own valuers. They have like an organisation that has valuers. So you have to get what you're given. But we have a long chat with the regional manager of the lender. We talk it through. We ask them to talk it through with their underwriters. And sometimes we can persuade the underwriters to talk to the valuation team about it. And we can give them advance notice of what we're expecting from it.
Surely there's a limit, though, because I think when there's maybe 6 or 7 bedrooms, it can be a little bit, is this just a normal house or is this HMO? But when you've got like a 26-bedroomed...
Yes, which we know about.
Which we know about. You can't argue that's just a house.
Oh, no. Well, like the point I mentioned earlier, where the valuer put a nil valuation on the property.
Just because they didn't like it and there was no comparables.
Yes, I mean, we do fight valuations, we do appeal, and most of the time we're told where to go.
Yeah. If you don't like the valuation, can you go to another lender, or is that tricky?
Yes. Well, what we do is ultimately we tell the client that your only choice is to go to another lender.
Yeah.
But we first of all check which valuation team went to the first one, and double check that the same valuation team won't be used by the new lender. Otherwise, we know the same man or woman could turn up at the door. Yeah. So that's the first thing we do. And then before we commit the client's money to the valuation, we have a chat with the regional manager of the lender, tell them what's happened before, tell them that we want to avoid that, and get their assistance if they can.
Let me ask you about credit scores. Any tips on that, or any key problems that you see happening?
Tips. Some people who run a credit card maybe spend £1,000 or £2,000 a month, and they always pay it off. So when the bill comes in, they pay the whole account. And sometimes, or supposing it's £2,000 they spend, sometimes they might be 1 or 2 days late paying that. That can show up on your credit file and work against you for a mortgage. So an alternative, we say, is to let the lender take the minimum payment due on that £2,000 every month by direct debit. The minimum payment might be 60 quid. Let them take the 60 quid and sometime in the month, when it's convenient to you, pay the balance. So you're still getting what you wanted. You're still achieving that the whole amount is paid off, but there's no danger that you're on holiday or in bed with the flu and you miss paying the thing.
What about changing banks? What about when you...
there's a lot of issues with changing banks. A lot of people are changing banks.
Or getting their bank closed down, especially business banks, with no reason given. That's something that...
Well, we had one of the Academy members who had his bank account with a particular bank just closed down with no explanation given. And he had a credit card with the same bank. And the next day, he had a text from the credit card part of the bank saying, "Oh, we've put your credit limit down." And that was a reaction to the fact that his bank account had been... All he can think of, the week before, he tried to pay £4,000 in cash in. And the cashier said, "Well, where's this come from, this cash?" And he said, "Mind your own business."
Exactly.
And I don't know what happened, whether he paid it in or whether he walked away without paying it in. But the next day, he heard from the bank that they'd closed his bank account.
Savage.
Well, if you change from one bank to another, the other issue that's occurring is this. The old bank account has direct debit set up for important payments. So you say to the old bank, "I'm changing to XYZ. What are we going to do about the direct debits?" Now, quite often, the old bank will say, "Don't worry, direct debits will be okay. We'll make sure they're paid." Or the new bank says, "Don't worry, direct debits will be paid." And quite often it doesn't work. The direct debits aren't paid.
Yeah.
And the old bank says, "Not our fault, it's the new bank's fault." And the new bank says, "It's not our fault, it's the old one's fault."
Yeah.
But that doesn't stop you necessarily from getting a late payment shown on your credit file.
Yeah.
And so that can cause havoc with mortgages sometimes. Not your fault.
What's the solution?
I think the solution is to tie the old or the new bank down in some form to a commitment to you in writing, if you can. It's very difficult to do that.
Yeah.
But to get the name of an individual who says, "I guarantee to you that your direct debits will be paid."
They should do that. I mean...
Well, yes, I don't know if it's possible to.
What about people that have got a property that's a residential house and then they learn about property investment?
Yes.
And then they decide, "I want to rent my house out."
Yes. A lot of people do that. Of course, the house is in your personal name. It's not in limited company name.
Yeah.
So if you want to change it into limited company name, potentially you've got a very expensive route ahead of you.
Yeah.
Because you might have to pay the limited company that you use, if you change it into a limited company name, may well have to pay stamp duty on the purchase, and you'll have 2 lots of legal fees. So you're into thousands of pounds.
Probably not the best to do that.
No.
It might be better to get consent or...
If you get consent to let from your existing lender, that's all right. Existing lenders, if you ask them, tell them you want to make it into an HMO or serviced accommodation, they may well say no. They may say, "We only want it as a single AST if you're going to rent it out."
Yeah.
Some lenders, if it's residential, who give you the consent to let, will either put the interest rate up that you're paying slightly because they say, "Well, it's now a commercial venture."
Yeah.
Or one of them, I think, one of the big ones, charges you 120 quid a year all the time you're renting it out.
I mean, often though, when people come to me and they say, "Should I rent my house out?"
Yes.
Normally the answer is, probably should sell it and reinvest it into an actual good buy-to-let.
That's what I say. I say to people who are thinking of renting their own house out, if today you had, supposing you think your house is worth 300, if today you had 300,000 in the bank and you wanted to buy a buy-to-let, would you buy this house that you own? And if the answer is no, the answer is probably sell it. You can then get all the equity out of it, use that to purchase something, probably in a limited company name, which is a very appropriate buy-to-let. Targeted as a buy-to-let.
It's the same as with your current portfolio. You've got to ask yourself the question, we look at our portfolio every quarter and say, would we buy that house now?
Yes.
And if the answer is no, potentially, maybe we should sell it.
Sell it, yeah. Well, a lot of people who have got portfolios are looking through the portfolio, weeding out the deadwood. selling off the ones that for whatever reason they feel are no longer working well for them, using the cash raised from that either to improve the ones they've already got or to buy more properties that are suitable.
Or maybe convert it into a holiday let potentially.
Yes.
So talk to me about what's base rate right now?
Base rate's 5.25%. They met a couple of weeks ago, because we're now at the end of June, aren't we, sitting here? And when they met, apparently the committee, on the committee, several of them wanted to reduce the rate. This is what we've heard. And a couple didn't want to reduce the rate. So it's stuck at 5.25% still at this moment. The next review is in August. All the speculation in the media is that it will go down in August. If it goes down, it'll probably just go down 0.25%. Yeah. So between now and August, of course, we're having a general election.
Yes.
So by August, there will be somebody else looking after us.
What's your prediction? What do you think is going to happen to rates over the next year or two?
I think rates probably will decline. They will go down because all the evidence is there that they might. The fact that lenders believe they'll go down.
Yes.
The lenders tend to be pretty good at these forecasts.
Yeah.
And they're forecasting lower rates.
How do you think that will affect the market and house prices in general? If property,
I couldn't forecast house prices because I couldn't have forecasted that they continue to rise as they are. I mean, we've got people who are saying, I found a house I want to buy, I'm in a queue.
Even now?
Yeah, even now, yeah.
That wasn't the case 6 months ago, though.
Well, it's patchy according to where you are in the country.
True.
Yeah, it's patchy.
See the market? You think the market's changing a little bit? People have got more of an appetite to buy?
Definitely. People have got more confidence.
Yeah.
More confidence than they had just after Christmas.
Rent's going up a lot.
Rents are still rising. We know that when interest rates do go down in whenever it is 2 or 3 years' time, that the people who've got buy-to-lets will be in a much stronger position than they feel they are now.
So buy-to-let market, you would say, is very much alive and well if you buy right.
Yeah, if you buy right, yes.
And then wait for rates to drop a little bit, rents to continue going up, house prices to potentially go up.
Yeah. Well, in certain areas of the country, house prices are still going up.
Yeah.
And some parts they're going down.
What do you think about the 99% mortgages for?
Well, the 99% mortgage came out by Yorkshire Building Society earlier this year, and Yorkshire Building Society, it's a residential mortgage, so you can only buy it if you're buying it somewhere to live in.
But I believe you can rent you can get a room rented out there in the house.
Well, most lenders will accept you having a lodger in.
But that's quite incredible, really. Getting a 99% mortgage and then renting one of the rooms out to a lodger, tax-free bedroom relief tax.
Well, yes,
you've got your mortgage paid almost.
Yes, we can't give tax relief or tax advice, of course, but I believe that at the moment it's still that if you rent a house to a lodger, the first 7,500 income a year is free. But the idea of it was to help first-time buyers who are struggling, couldn't get a deposit together to buy it. Now, the thing about Yorkshire Building Society was that they only deal directly with the public. They don't deal through brokers.
Right.
That's the first thing. And secondly, to qualify for that mortgage, you have to have a high credit score and you have to have all your bits and pieces in order. And we had several people who approached them. They just didn't fit. Now, Yorkshire Building Society, who only deal directly with the public, also do have an arm of their business that deals through brokers, and that's called Accord Mortgages. And about 2 weeks ago, Accord Mortgages also introduced the same scheme.
99% mortgages?
99% mortgages.
Great. So that's something you are helping people with now? Or
yes. And of course, last year, Skipton Building Society came out with the 100% one. And again, not many people qualify for that. So to qualify for the 100% mortgage, it's got to be residential. You've got to be a first-time buyer. And you've got to have been a tenant for the 12 months leading up to that time.
Right.
And the mortgage payment with Skipton cannot exceed what you've been paying for the last 12 months per month rent. We had a lot of people we talked to about it, and a lot of them didn't qualify for it.
It's quite niche.
It is a niche.
But it's interesting then. It shows the appetite for lending again.
Well, it shows that lenders are scratching their heads as to how to lend money. Because they need to lend money.
Yeah. Otherwise, they can't eat.
No, that's right. And as we know, Skipton Building Society, as an example, was the very first lender in 1997, to come out with the buy-to-let mortgage.
Yeah.
And a lot of the other lenders said, what on earth is this? You know.
It's crazy now, because now there's so many, there's hundreds.
Yeah, that's right.
We've been talking a lot about 99% mortgages, which is probably going to be young people, first-time buyers. What about old people that have got equity in their homes, want to release it to maybe they want to save on inheritance tax, they want to hand down money to their children to invest, or they want to just refinance for themselves.
Yes, I mean, one of the Conservative MPs at the moment has recently been heard saying that he thinks that inheritance tax is toxic. That was his phrase, I think. So whether politicians in the near future are going to do anything about it, I don't know. But let's give you an example of what's happening. Perhaps you've got an elderly couple in their 70s, even 80s, who own their own house they live in outright. Perhaps it's worth 300,000. They've got perhaps one child. And so that child is going to get everything when they pass away. They might like to see, and a lot of them are doing this, that the child benefits now from the value of mum and dad's house. So what they do is they raise what's called a lifetime mortgage on their own property, give the cash to the child, and the child goes off and starts building their portfolio with that cash. A lifetime mortgage does not have to be repaid in the life of the borrower. So in other words, if it's somebody of 75 who borrows 50,000, they don't actually have to make interest or capital payments. The interest can just be added on. It just means that when the property becomes vacant, because they've died, and their offspring sell the property or mortgage it, they don't get, the value of the property less whatever it is, 50,000 borrowed. They get less 50,000, less any interest that's accrued on top.
So that's a great way of elderly people releasing equity from their homes.
Yes, and a lot of them are doing it. And not just for that purpose, but for other purposes as well. I mean, they're doing it to have a better lifestyle for whatever time they've got left.
Yeah.
It's a system that's been around for many years since I've been doing mortgages. But a lot of the time, if you mention it to people, they suck their teeth. Oh, be careful, So in the past, there were a lot of schemes that weren't the best for people. But there's a lot of hybrid schemes now that can adjust to work with people's needs. So there's a lot of that going on.
And have you got experience buying properties yourself as well?
I have, yes.
Tell me about those.
Well, the first one I bought was a flat. And when I was an estate agent at the time, and I was called to sell it. And the man came to the door, which was not locked, it was open because it was hanging off its hinges. And he invited me in, and it was a flea pit. In other words, it was a disgusting, filthy place. And the flies were everywhere. And he asked me to sell it. And I said, well, you can't sell it in this condition. It would normally be worth 25 to 30,000. But nobody will buy this in this place. And he said, well, I owe my mortgage £11,000. If somebody buys it from me for £11,000, I'm happy. So I bought it. And it was disgusting. And on the day I purchased it, it was a Friday as usual, my solicitor rang me and said, yeah, it's gone through. Go there. So I went there and he was in bed. He hadn't moved out. And he said, can I have another 2 or 3 weeks, please? And I said, no. If I bought it, it's my property. You vacate. Yeah. So he said, well, give me a couple of hours and I'll vacate it. So I said, well, I will do, but I'll pull it today. I will ask my solicitor to get the money back from your solicitor if you're still here when I come back in 2 hours. And as I walked away, he shouted at me, do you know anybody who's got a van? And I said, no. So when I went back 2 hours later, he had gone. And it looked as if he'd just got out of bed because he left all his personal possessions there.
Wow. So
I rang my solicitor and he said, well, just carry on. And so I did most of the renovations myself. The actual electrics, when I got the electrician in, were the old-fashioned fuse box. So there were no circuit breakers, which is what we expect as a basic human safety level in a property. Circuit breakers. And the electrician said that when he looked at the fuses in the fuse boxes, the actual fuse wire wasn't fuse wire, it was paper clips, which he'd seen a lot of times before. So you know how thick the wire on a paper clip is. So he said it was a time bomb, basically. So I could have plugged something in at some stage and I could have been taken away by the electric.
But instead you did it up and sold it and made a nice profit?
Did it up and sold it, and we sold it for 33,000 and it cost me £3,000.
Fantastic.
So I bought it for 11, cost me 15 altogether, sold it for 33.
But that's exactly what people do now in this market, but just with an extra zero on the
That's
numbers.
right. The way I was able to do it was because nobody would set foot in it.
Yeah.
Because as you went to go in, a swarm of flies hit you in the face from the smell and because of the way he occupied the property.
Yeah.
And so I often say to people, don't be frightened to buy a flea pit like that.
Right.
Because if you're buying for cash, it doesn't matter. If you're buying on a bridge, then it can be there. You can't mortgage a property like that.
No, which is another reason why you can buy it so cheap, because no one, I imagine 90% of people that buy properties buy with a mortgage.
Yes.
So if you're buying a property that is unmortgageable, then you can buy it for whatever price you want.
Well, that's right. Now, the other one I bought, again, I was an estate agent at the time, working in Wolverhampton. So I knew the area, and it was a house. And even in those days, it was cheap. It was £7,000. And it had what was called a closing order on it. So it was unfit for human habitation. So I bought it for cash for £7,000. And I saw this long list given by the council of work that had to be done to bring it in line with a property that is suitable for human habitation. And I didn't believe most of the things that were on this list. I knew from my own experience that it was some sort of incorrect information,
right,
being polite. So I asked the next door neighbour to the house, and they said, no, what happened was the elderly couple who were tenants needed to be rehoused by the council. And so to get them rehoused, the council put a closing order on it so that it was unfit for human habitation. So as soon as I bought it, I called the council up, a housing officer came out, or a planning officer, and he and I walked around and looked at this list, and he was looking and saying, no, that's not necessary, no, strike that off the list. No, that's not, strike that off the list. No, he said, you're right, most of this on this list isn't necessary. Just do the things that are remaining on this list. Call me back when you've done it and I'll sign it off. That's exactly what happened. So I bought it for £7,000. I think it cost me £6,000 altogether to do it. And I sold it for £32,000. So had a good experience there. But you can only do that if you either know what you're doing, or you've got somebody you're working with who understands what they're doing. You can't just leap in. And so, for example, if you get a closing order like the one I was faced with on the house, you need somebody to advise you who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, of course.
Because if I'd have had to go through all the things on this list, it would have been too expensive and I wouldn't have made any money on the project.
As a property investor and entrepreneur, estate agents can be your best friend.
Yeah.
But they also can be your worst enemy.
Well, I won't say they're your enemy, but they are. We have to remember, what's the Latin term for it? Caveat emptor. Let the buyer beware. In other words, the duty of the estate agent is to do the best for the person they're acting for, who is the person selling the house. So they have to be as optimistic when they're talking to people who might like to buy the property, as optimistic as they can. Yeah.
So if you ask them, what do you think the rent will be? What do you think the value will be? I mean, you've got to remember they're the one selling the house.
Yes. They're going to give you optimistic figures.
What, have you got any horror stories with estate agents?
Yes, here's a picture of a property in Doncaster. Now, a couple of years back, a client rang me who's buying buy-to-lets all the time. He said, I found another one, I'm viewing it tomorrow. Here's the address, will you have a look at it? So here's the picture of it, a close-up of the front of the house that I found on Google Maps. So I looked at it on Google Maps. And as you can see, between the bedroom window and the archway of the porch below, there's a very, very large crack that runs through the brick.
And you found that on Google Images?
Yeah. So I rang him and I said, what about this dirty, great big crack in the front elevation? And he said, there isn't one. And I said, there is. I'm looking at it now on Google Maps. Oh, he said, no, I'll send you over a photograph from the agent's brochure. And here's the black and white photograph from the agent's brochure.
Holy moly. So what, they just photoshopped the crack
I don't know whether they photoshopped it or whether somebody put a little concrete panel over but they hadn't actually.
Or was that the seller that maybe did that? Or do you think it was the agent?
Who knows? But see, Google Maps, if you look at a property on Google Maps, it gives you the date at which the photo was taken, which is usually a year or two back, isn't it?
So there's a lesson right there. I've noticed similar things in Wolverhampton. I had a friend that bought a HMO,
right,
and the smallest bedroom was exactly 70 square foot, which is the minimum.
Yes.
But the floor plan was wrong. And of course, there's a small print, isn't there, with the agent saying, these are just estimates.
Yes.
And it meant that he had an absolute nightmare getting an HMO licence because the bedroom was too small.
Yes.
Due diligence is key.
You've got to make your own inquiries.
Exactly.
You can't rely on things that you're told by other people. So some people, when they go to buy a buy-to-let property, ask the agent, they say, I'm going to buy it to rent it out. How much rent do you think I'll get? And the agent might say, you'll get $1,200 for that. Need to double check it.
Yeah, with another agent.
Because the $1,200 is probably the top end of optimistic figure. And that $1,200 might not be confirmed by the valuer acting for the person.
But there are some great agents that are very honest and will give you good figures. Yes, but you need to just be clued up yourself so no one can pull the wool over your eyes.
Well, yes. I mean, if you're going to buy a property, in a street, in a town, like the Doncaster one, I think you need to phone an estate agent in that area who is not selling the property.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking of buying a property in such and such street, purchase price so much, want to rent it out for so much, how's that sound?
Yeah.
And they'll soon tell you, that's too much for that street.
Yeah. Or if the plan is to sell it and you're trying to work out the end value,
yes.
ask another agent, hey, I'm looking to sell this down the line. What do you think you might get for it if it was in good
because if
condition?
that other agent over-exit and tells you it's more, and then you use that agent to try and sell it, you're going to say to them, well, what?
Right. So they're going to give you a pretty accurate...
Well, fingers crossed,
Yeah.
you'll get an independent, accurate appraisal of what it should be.
Andrew, thank you very much.
No problem. All right, nice to see you again.
You too.
Okay, glad you came to us.